it was this week last year, I was reading online and I came across a story in the wallstreetjournal.com about my friend Mike Ott. And the bank, U.S. Bank, where he works, was being awarded a national award, and he was being lifted up as a person who's leading the movement to hire military veteran officers into business. And my first thing I did before I even finished the article is I picked up the phone and I called Mike Ott and said, "That's fantastic. Will you tell that story November of next year and be the closer for the Good Leadership Breakfast?" And he said yes. As we were talking about this back and forth, something really powerful came up in my life. Last week was Veterans Day, right? So my father-in-law, who was a World War II vet, got to eat breakfast free at Hy-Vee. He got to eat lunch free somewhere else in town, and he got to eat dinner free at the Elks Club. Because as a society in Owatonna, Minnesota, they were celebrating the veterans. Mike and I are the same age. We graduated high school and college at the same time. I was in the third to the last group that got a draft card. Who in the room got a draft card? When that came, I had a very powerful conversation with my father. My father did not have a good experience being in the military, and he told me often when I was a kid, "I want to live in such a way and create such a life that you don't have to go there." That was the framework that I grew up with. And when that draft card came, it was a really interesting day in my life. Luckily, that passed, and Mike told me that he got a draft card when he was actually at the Air Force Academy. That's kind of funny, isn't it? I think it's a real pleasure for those of us to take a glimpse into the private lives of people who served so successfully inside the military, which is one of the reasons why I'm so excited to introduce you to one of the most positive people I've ever met. Please join in welcoming Mike Ott.
Hey man, thanks buddy. Thank you very much. Paul, thank you very much, and good morning everyone. I am pretty positive. I've got to make up for a lack of brain cells one way, and I'll tell you that Paul tells that story around being at the Air Force Academy, which is how I got my start as a young man, and I would say emerging leader years and years ago. I had grown up in Chicago. My father was a policeman. I went to a public high school in the city, had two younger sisters, and knew that I wanted to serve my country at a young age, and I'll get to that. So I made the decision, and I was lucky enough to sneak through the cracks and go to the Air Force Academy. And I remember sort of in the second, third week of basic training, hearing guys across the hall or in the dorm next to me crying, missing mom and dad. I couldn't wait to get out of Chicago. I couldn't wait to go do something different. I couldn't wait for a challenge or do something big. But I still missed home, and I looked forward every day to go down to my mailbox, and I still remember the code, CDAFG. It was on this little dial, and I would dial in my code, and I pull out a letter, and it's a letter from mom or grandma or one of my sisters, and I get this flyer. And it's like from the Selective Service Committee saying, your draft number is this, you need to register, for the draft, should we need to do that? I'm like, holy crap, you already got me. Like, what's going on, right? So it was a really good memory and moment for me, but I want to talk about the moment that we're in right now and say thank you to all of you, because where we are today and where I am today is a reflection of decisions that I've made and we've all made to create the future that we live in today. Today is nothing but the future of yesterday. And so when I talk about my experiences, it's less around how special I am, because I don't think of myself as very special, but I do think that I've had some special experiences, and I think that I've been privileged to work with some amazing and special teams. Currently the team that I work with, and in fact the best team that I've worked with as a leader, is at U.S. Bank and our wealth management group, but throughout the bank entirely. So that's the premise of a lot of the discussion I'd like today, and share some stories around what I've learned, a ton of mistakes that I've made, and perhaps provide for you a little bit of perspective around what it meant to me and perhaps others, because I know there's a lot of veterans in the room today, and I want to thank all of them for all the service and sacrifice that they've made. But leave you with a moment perhaps around some judgment or some lessons learned, and remember, think about the goodness that you do every day, because sometimes the goodness that you do won't be recognized for years to come, and I'll touch on that later. So When I talk today and I think about the 7 Fs at the bank, I've been a part of U.S. Bank now for 6 years. And I was brought in to help us build out, reestablish, and fortify an amazing business that we've had for over 100 years. That's our wealth management business. And I didn't know a lot about wealth management, and some would argue I still don't, but I know a little bit about teams, and I know how to work with teams and drive the goodness out of those teams by building a great inner circle of folks. We've worked with Paul over the past 6 years. Since the beginning, and it parallels very much the beginning of who we are as an organization in wealth management at the bank in terms of that resurgence. 6 years ago, we engaged Paul, and he helped us build some core elements of the culture that we were seeking to build, drive, and grow in who we were within this awesome organization. So I want to thank you for that, Paul, because it's lasting, it's touching, and we live this every day. Right? The bookends that you see on the 7 Fs, faith and future, I touched a little bit on the future, and I'll talk about how I think we can drive an even better future as a country. I think this is a phenomenal country, not an F, but it sounds like an F, all right? A phenomenal country because we have great citizens. We have good citizens like all of you. We have great members and former members of the military that have volunteered to serve so that others don't have to serve, and each one of us made that choice. So when I think about my journey and how I found myself where I am today, I go back to something that was just very recent. I graduated from the Air Force Academy 30 years ago, same age as Paul, lucky enough to get in. 30 years ago, we had a reunion. We graduated about 940, 950 folks. We started at about 1,400, 1,500 folks. So after 4 years, 60, 70% graduate. And we all go do things. Like my friend Bruce over here who graduated 2 years ahead of me, he became a test pilot. He did really cool, sexy stuff. I was a dork engineer, all right? But I really liked being a dork engineer because I was okay at it and I had a lot of fun with it, right? But Bruce did some amazing things too, and I know many others of you have as well in serving the country. So I made this decision to go to the academy. I got in, and a month ago, I went to my 30-year reunion. 30 years ago, 950 of us raised our right hand. The commencement speaker was Vern Orr, who was Secretary of the Air Force at the time. The year before it had been Ronald Reagan. I missed that one. It had been great to have him as my commencement speaker. And we all graduated, and we all did different things. Engineering like myself, flight school, different operations, military, police, you name it, a lot of different things. Many of our folks were found in harm's way. I never had to do that, unlike a lot of my colleagues. I've never been in harm's way. All right, I've been deployed, I've been to other countries, I've been on many other continents, but I never had to face bullets coming at me, all right? Nonetheless, many of us had different ways of serving. So I go to this reunion, and about 340 of us showed up. Some are still in the Air Force. One of my pals is a 3-star general. He's head of Tactical Air Force out of Phoenix, Arizona. Other friends are CEOs of different companies. Some became pastors after retiring after 20 years. But they all hark back to some core elements around knowing who they were. The collective experiences, the sense of character, the sense of integrity. And I focus a lot on integrity, both in who I am, how I communicate with my teams, how I work with my teams, and how I ascribe certain values in, amongst, and with my family. So I go to the reunion. We have a couple of drinks, we stay up late, a lot of guys go golfing. I don't because I think it's a waste of time. And so they go do that and they have a ton of fun. But the most poignant part of the whole 3-day series is the memorial service, okay? The memorial service. We go to the chapel. If you've been to Colorado Springs, you know the iconic chapel, 17 spires, 1 for every apostle, then 5 for the chief of staff of the Air Force, right? So that's the joke. It's a lot of fun. We go there and it's a memorial for our fallen. So 30 years later, graduate 960, 28 of my classmates are no longer with us. Half of them because of mishaps or harm's way of some sort, another 2/3 because of harm's way or a mishap in the military of some sort, and then some from natural causes. Many I knew extremely, extremely, extremely well. All right, one just died 2 years ago flying over Afghanistan. And I thought about that, and it brings me back to how I got started. After I was raised in Chicago by Chicago policemen and a woman who was a secretary in the FBI and wound up being the first person in my family to ever go to college. So they did something right, and I'm very proud and pleased of my family and my origins because it created me. But back to the reunion. After the Mass, we go out to a wall. It's a memorial wall. And there we've got 28 plaques. And it's up to the family, the loved one, the spouse, the children, to leave some memento, some talisman of that person's memory that pulled them back to what it meant for them to go to the Air Force Academy and do something bigger than themselves. So I go, and I go there because my best friend and the best man in our wedding, my wife Stephanie is here as my daughter Natalie, was on this wall because he died in an aircraft accident 12 years ago. Closest friend in the world, all right, best man, we did everything together. Roommate for 2.5 years, all right? And so I'm walking across the wall, and I'm not going to share what's on his stone because I'm going to leave that for me because it's very special. But I will share with you one that I saw on the wall of another classmate whom I knew pretty well, all right? I was saddened 8 years ago when he passed, and I saw it, and I'm like, oh my God, that is Bruce. That is it. That is it. That's the guy, all right? And it said this, and it's a Navy euphemism, so forgive that, but this defined how he thought of integrity. And he said, shiny means nothing to an anchor. All right, think about that, all right? And that's how I begin today's stories, all right, with that story. Because to me, that's a reflection of something that resonated through all of us, and I know resonates through everyone here in this room, because you're here, all right? Shiny means nothing to an anchor. That is a sense of knowing who you are, a sense of integrity, a sense of dignity, compassion, commitment, and care for others, all right? All wrapped up in that one saying. And I had to stop, and I pulled another one of my close friends, who's a software engineer, CEO in Boulder, Colorado, who's captain of the gymnastics team and one of the funniest guys you know, also doesn't like golf, which I love about him. And I pull him up, and I look at this, and I said, hey, what do you think? And he's like, I got to take a picture of that. So we go back and forth, and we share with our classmates that regretfully couldn't make it because they were out doing different things. So that means something to me because, one, it's a person that I spent 4 years with, and it's a person that has a lot of shared values, and it's a person that did a lot of good in the world, okay? A lot of good in the world. This person died in an aircraft accident, like I said, 8 years ago. And the good that he did, sometimes we'll know about, other times we won't. You never know when you're going to make a difference, but do good anyways, all right? So that meant a lot to me. It gave me a sense of belonging. It gave me a sense of a reminder. And it gave me a sense of the future that I'm living today based on decisions that I made years ago. An experience and a ton of mistakes, all right? A ton of mistakes, and we hardly have enough time to scratch the surface on those. And I'll share a few, though. They revolve around mentoring and the need to mentor folks, to help them find that guidance, to find that light post, to find that beacon, to do something big, meaningful, and powerful that matters to them. So integrity, shiny means nothing to an anchor. How it started for me was, my father, as I'd shared with you, grew up in Chicago, born on the north side near Wrigley Field, and then northwest side, public high school, knew that, wow, in order for me to make it happen, I got to figure this out. And I started notifying the academies of my interest right after a family vacation in 1973. I was 9 years old. 9 years old. Mike, my sister Rose, who ultimately went on to West Point, and my other sister Diane, who is 2 years younger than her, ultimately went on to Harvard, all right? I don't know how it happened, I don't know how my parents did that, but we drive to Colorado in the 1968 Buick LeSabre, okay, all right? Blue, black vinyl roof, four-door, not a seatbelt in the car, all right? I remember my father taking a piece of plywood and measuring the floor so that when they were driving straight through, because we could save $30 by not staying in a hotel in Nebraska and drive straight through all the way to Colorado, taking out a piece of plywood, stenciling it, cutting it out, and putting that on the floorboards so that one of the kids could sleep on the floor and not have to sit on the transmission hump, all right? So one of us laid on the floor, one laid on the seat, and the other kid laid on the back windowsill. How's that, all right? Our parents loved us, all right? So we drive to Colorado, and we saved $30 by not staying in a hotel. My dad saved up his money. He was a policeman, as you know, and he worked a part-time job as a security guard at a local bank, right? Maybe that's how I got into the banking business, right? So we worked as a local security guard at the bank to save up money for our first family vacation. I remember stopping in Nebraska. We still have a picture. We saved another $8 by not eating at some breakfast joint and cooking on the side of the road with a Coleman stove, all right? Bacon, eggs, and my dad, thinking he's Mr. Camper Yukon guy, all right, doing this on the side of the road. That's how we ate breakfast on our way to Colorado, driving about 25 straight hours, okay? We got there, we saw Royal Gorge, we saw Pikes Peak, did it all. Oh, what the hell, let's stop by this place, the Air Force Academy. At this point in time, it really was only less than 20 years old. It was a fledgling academy. The best, but the fledgling academy, all right? And we got there, 1973, remember this, Vietnam is still kind of there, it's still kind of happening, right? It was only men at the academy at this point in time. It was about 5 years later that the smart decision was made to make this, open to women, and I think some of the best leaders we have today in the military are some of our female leaders. So we go there, we're up on the chapel wall, and I look down at this and I see these guys running up, the bell's going off, it's lunchtime, and everybody's putting on their flight suits, all right? And I looked at this, I'm like, oh my God, I want to do this. Like, I want to do this. And so I remember coming home, and I was 9 years old. I was going to St. Eugene's School, and I went to the public high school down the road, Taft High School. I went into my counselor and said, hey, Mr. Nelson, I want to go to the Air Force Academy. He's like, yeah, right, good luck. We haven't sent a person to an academy in years, and like I said, I'm going to make up for lack of brain cells with the positive attitude, a sense of grit, a sense of commitment, and a sense of knowing who I am, and that's what I was able to do. So I wound up going to the academy. I had awesome experiences. Went through survival school. I jumped out of planes. I flew gliders. I was elected as the honor rep for our squadron, where I was selected by my peers to represent our honor code, which is something that is beyond sacred for us. All right? So I did that, and I was lucky enough not just to get in, but I graduated. I like being in the crosshairs. My team knows that. I like the challenge. I like it when there are things that seem insurmountable or put in front of us and the ability to try and get it done. I love that. I run to it, and it's a ton of fun. So I like being in the crosshairs. I didn't like being in the crosshairs of the dean as often as I was, but nonetheless, I got out of those crosshairs. I wound up graduating with an engineering degree and ultimately went to a small R&D base in Boston, where I had the fortune to do some really cool engineering, all top secret, that only today is starting to come out. You don't know what good you're going to do, and sometimes you don't even know how it's going to be reflected. So that's a little bit about how I got there. But throughout that journey, I had a lot of different experiences that help anchor me to, one, the future that I want to create based on the foundation that we've created as a group of leaders and who we are as a team, both in the bank and then in my role in the military, where I just retired as a colonel in the Air Force Reserves doing some work at the Pentagon. And I think a little bit about this notion of faith and the sense of conviction, faith in each other, faith in ourselves, faith in the spirit that we hold close to who we are that's very, very personal. And I'll start with that front end of the bookend, and that is never forget as leaders, and that's what all of you are here today, the value of mentorship, the value of believing in someone when they have that moment, all right, of doubt, that moment of like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I mean, I still have those, right? But I got a lot of faith in my teams. I have a lot of faith in the notion that we have done a ton of work knowing that the strategies that we're about to embark on, backed up by the tactics and the activities that serve those, are pointed in the right direction. And we have the courage and the faith to redirect if it isn't working. So back to faith. I remember as a young cadet, we all had to fly light planes. And I went to the academy to be a leader, and if I flew, that's cool. And I wanted the different experiences. I remember it was a light plane, and they said, every one of you guys is going to solo. I go, well, I don't know if it's going to work for me. I don't know if that's going to happen. And I'm with my instructor pilot, and he was a crusty old Vietnam guy, and he used more Effenheimers than my father did, all right? And he thought he was tough on me. I'm like, this is easy. You didn't see my dad. I mean, my dad was tough. And I remember one time we're in the small little light plane. It was like a Cessna of some sort, and we taxi over to the side, and it was a little different, and I wasn't ready for this. And I looked at him, I'm like, what are we doing? He's like, I'm shutting the door, you're going to solo today. I'm like, what, right? I've only had 4 flights. He's like, you're ready. If you don't believe in yourself, just know that I do. You can do this, right? Wouldn't you know it? Best flight of my life. A lot of others after that were pretty crappy, all right? Best flight of my life because I had him underneath my wings and I flew it, I nailed it, it was great, all right? Never, ever, ever underestimate the value of what you do to help someone see through something that's difficult, see through a moment of duress. You're powerful. Your faith, your convictions, your sense of commitment to the team matters. So I get through that, and I wound up serving 7 years active duty, and then about just over 20 years in the reserves in a variety of different capacities. I had some amazing experiences. Like I said, I wasn't in harm's way. I think the worst I got, and Heidi Humphrey and I were making fun of this, I got a paper cut at the Pentagon. We were doing some strategy stuff, all right? Nonetheless, I promise you that I know the Air Force got less out of me than I got out of it, all right? It did. I had so much, I benefited so much as a leader, as a man, as a human, and as a citizen from my experiences, and it's helped me become the leader that I am today. One of the other stories that I think helps underscore this sense of integrity, and I come back to that in terms of integrity, is not just knowing who you are, right, and a willingness to face that and drive who you are, but also trying to know who others are, all right? This also comes under the sense of, if I want to build a future with this team, all right, based on what we have today, I have got to know that this team shares a similar set of values, characteristics, don't have to have the same attributes. But boy, you know what? I tell my teams, our inner circle has to be made up of people that we know, like, and trust. And I want to go have a beer with you, all right? I want to be able to relate. Don't want you to be just like me. That would be really bad, all right? But I come back to this. It's really, really, really important. And it has served me incredibly well as a leader, because as a leader, you should always think of yourself as a follower at the same time. And here I was, a young lieutenant. I was working on this top secret intelligence system that ultimately got deployed to Kuwait. All right, this was back in the first Gulf War. I was a captain. I'm sorry, I was a young captain. But I was 25 years old. I was a snot-nosed academy grad. A lot of folks like to look at these guys and go, oh, wait till he trips up. I can't wait to exploit that, right? Wait till he or she trips up. Because there's just some folks that might think that way, and I don't think it's an appropriate euphemism, but that's the way it is. And I remember one time I was down at Langley Air Force Base. We were about to get some work done. And there was this crusty old master sergeant. And for those of you not in the military, you know that we have our officer corps, and these are the lieutenants up through generals. And then we have the enlisted corps. These are the smart guys and gals. These are the ones that really get it done. These are the ones that aren't commissioned and may not be the official leaders. But man, if you don't lean on them as leaders, you're making a big mistake. Recognize the talent you have on your team, all right, as a leader, regardless of their title, regardless of their formal education, and regardless of how different their experiences are from yours. Rely on their expertise no matter where they captured it and garnered it. And I remember this moment because this guy, he was older than my father at the time. You know, he must have been 50, all right? And we got a problem here, all right? We were going through some operational testing, and we got a problem. And it wasn't good. And guess what? I was the man. I was this captain. I was the boss. I had PhDs. I had enlisted guys, everybody working for me. And this guy, completely insubordinate. And I knew it was a test in the moment. I knew he was trying to press my button, get under the skin of this academy guy, and trip me up. I don't mind somebody trying to trip me up if it's to help make me better, okay? But if it's to trip me up, I'm going to outflank you. And so, but it's also, I got to put myself in this guy's shoes. And I think of my daughter, Natalie, who's a 9th grader, and we just went and saw, many of you did, To Kill a Mockingbird, all right, shown at the Guthrie. And we saw that 2 Sundays ago, and Natalie's been reading that book in her class. And one of her essays, and she did a great job on this, was, and really to understand someone, like Atticus said, you've got to put yourself in their shoes. You've got to understand their perspective. So at a young age, and I think I picked this up when I was a cadet or in high school, I got to try, as insubordinate as this is, I got to try and find a way to connect here. Because we have a future together. We've got a mission to get done, and believe it or not, we got people in the field downrange that need this. So this guy comes up to me, older than my dad, 50, all right, comes up to me and said, well, son, what are you going to do now? Right? What are you going to do now? Well, I put my arm around him. I looked over at the senior master sergeant and I said, gee, Dad, I was hoping you were going to help me. All right? He didn't know what to do. I tripped him back up, all right, brought him in really close, and he never once did that again, right? He was eating out of my hand, and we drove a better outcome as a team. Didn't light him up, didn't assert my authority, brought him in. Another F should be finesse. You can do that as a leader. It's really, really important. So we ultimately got through some of the testing issues. We were still on the bubble. We were pushing a little further ahead than we should have. And we made a decision. The war happened pretty quick. My partner was going to deploy, and I was going to follow him up behind that because we were working on an intelligence system. Today, you would look at it and say, that's a fax machine with a big, big piece of plastic around it. 20 years ago, you didn't see a lot of these. It was this massive machine. You could drop out of the back of a ship. You could drop it out of an airplane, out of the back of a pickup truck. It could bounce, roll, spin, have dust spit at it, and it could still capture satellite signals and push fax information to a battlefield commander to make some tactical decisions. It was completely a beta. It wasn't ready for prime time, but we were getting some channel feedback from the people downrange. That means folks in the field about to get in the thick of it in Kuwait and in Iraq, that they weren't certain that some of the standard communication systems were going to work, right? And we knew that this relied on asymmetric communication systems that not many people had access to, but we did. And so we were down at Langley. We got to talking to a loadmaster. This is one of the enlisted guys, experts, and he was loading the plane. His guys were loading the plane, and I told him, look, we'll buy you a case of beer. Just get this on the plane, all right? We got guys in Kuwait that will take it off, and you don't ever have to worry about it, all right? Because we had Marines in Kuwait that were at the very, very tippy end of the spear, okay, that were going to make stuff happen. We had some F-16 drivers that are also going to make some stuff happen. We got it on the jet. Big old tanker, flies it to Kuwait, lands, get on the call, get a hold of some of our friends that are over there. Hey, you make sure you're at the air base, right? Get that off before anybody sees, and let's get it to the Marine Corps guys. Great thing about Marines is they love breaking the rules like I do, all right? That's the great thing about the Marines. So we get it there, all right? Well, wouldn't you know it, we've got these redundant systems. Redundant systems, they fail from time to time too. Thank goodness, because this system was up and running. Again, it used an orthogonal system around using satellites to connect. Stop for a second. At the end of the war, General Schwarzkopf, and many of you probably recall this, is going through a debrief of how we were so successful because of the air campaign and the onslaught of our Army and Marine Corps folks on the ground right behind that. And he tells the story, and he shows a video clip of this truck going over a bridge, all right? It's infrared, it's late night, night vision goggles, all right? And this bridge blows up right after this truck goes over the bridge. And Schwarzkopf stops and looks and goes, that's the luckiest guy in Iraq, all right? That's the luckiest guy. We blew up that bridge. All the systems were down. This didn't come out until 6 months later, and now it's only known. The system that we snuck into Kuwait, all right, is the system that was used to send targeting data, all right, to Marines on the ground to hand off to F-16 drivers in a fax, because the other things were conflicted. 6 months later, we find out that that was the impact that we had. You never know the good you can do in the moment that you do it. But if you do it, you know in the end things are going to be a lot better. So that's a quick thumbnail of how I find myself today. I find myself today privileged to work at an organization like U.S. Bank that is known as one of the most ethical organizations in the country, not just a financial institution, organizations in the country. Our commitment to serve the military, the veterans, and military members, Reserve Guard, deployed, you name it, is profound relative to the country. And not because we get accolades or not because there's a sense of, hey, this is good for the community. We do it because it's the right thing to do. And we know that the employees that we bring in with that experience are folks that are going to make it matter for us. We benefit tremendously by bringing them into our ranks. And over the past 4 or 5 years, we've hired thousands. This year alone, we've hired hundreds to bring into the ranks of who we are. So the organization has values that align appropriately with who we are in the 7Fs, doing good, empowering human potential. So I want to thank you for your attention today. I want to thank you, Paul, for the privilege to be here, and it's been my treat. Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.
Great job. Thank you. So Mike, you gave us a very vivid picture of this person who was your pilot trainer, who believed in you, closed the door and said, go off on your first solo flight. So that's the most intriguing thing I heard in this conversation, and I would like to challenge you to have that conversation at your table. Who was that person for you that believed in you so much that set you off on your journey? Ready, set, go. We had some great conversations about powerful people in our lives who really encouraged us at our table. I hope you did the same. My dear friend Mark Bergman, he's not here today, but it's part of our ritual that around Thanksgiving time we make sure that all the buckets that were on the tables go home with people. So there's a big pile of them out there. If you want to take home a paint pail because maybe you have some painting to do at your house, that'd be great. But even better, if you have the courage to redo this ritual at your Thanksgiving table, we've done it. It's outstanding. So you can take a bucket when you leave today. I have a couple of questions for our friend Mike here. The first one is, I'm fascinated with your relationship with your father. Mm-hmm. He came up several different times in that story. What's the relationship with your father today?
Thanks. Roy is a great guy. I think the lessons from my father are some of the things that, my relationship is great, okay? It's great now. I couldn't wait to get out of Chicago, all right? I remember going to the academy and came home for the first time Thanksgiving. Flew home, long weekend, and this will help illustrate sort of the sense of it. I come home, I had 2 tests that Wednesday or Tuesday. I also was in boxing as a freshman. It's sort of like mandatory get your face beat in.
Yeah.
I had a boxing match that morning. I got off the plane. I'd never had a zit in my life. So I'm at the academy under a lot of stress. I got zits. I got 2 black eyes. I get off the plane, and my mom looks at me. She's like, "Oh my God, what are they doing to you?" Right? And I got off the plane, and I was the happiest kid in the world. I was doing exactly what I wanted to do. I was beat up. And I remember later that night, my dad says, "Hey, you can have a beer. It's okay." I'm like, "Okay." And he pulled me aside. He's like, "Hey, I bet I look like a pussycat compared to those guys." I go, "Dad, I'm sorry to tell you, but I got it made. This is so easy." All right?
Yeah.
Right? And that was an indirect compliment because there were a lot of values that I learned and I picked up through him. He was a good man. He's still alive. He's a great guy. We'll see him at Thanksgiving. And my relationship with him is great. And it's gotten great because I put myself in his shoes and I thought about how he got where he is, and that's a different story, and it was a very difficult one. He's a wonderful man.
It's great to hear.
Yeah.
Well, you're obviously in great shape. You've kept that alive. We've been doing measuring on 7Fs for years and years now, and fitness is always the lowest. So how do you keep the fitness alive for you?
Well, you picked that up at school too, and it's just a habit. It's a habit, and I feel Friday's my day off, but other than that, it's swimming, running, biking, a variety of stuff, P90X, fitness, right? So stuff like that. And it's inculcated into who we are. My wife is into that. Our children are active. And it doesn't have to be one thing. It's just a variety of things. And we try to do that together as a family.
I'll try to remember that. So you mentioned the Pentagon. Mm-hmm. I'm fascinated to know what's it like working in the Pentagon?
So most guys would look at that, and gals would look at that like, oh, it's a staff tour. I want to get back in the jet. I want to go back doing the... I didn't get into the Pentagon until later in my career as a reservist 6.5 years ago, where it was a point in time where I was out of the reserves. I was going to kind of wrap it up and be done as a lieutenant colonel. And I got a tap on the shoulder from a colleague with whom I'd worked years ago. He had stayed in uniform in the reserves like me. I had a very passive job in the reserves at the time. And they were building out a unit that was made up of Wall Street guys and gals that had engineering backgrounds that were still in the military. Then we worked for the chief, so we created a new unit for the chief technology officer for the Defense Department. So the CTO, DARPA, all the labs, everything reported up to him. And we were a team of leaders that were boundary spanners that sat between the civilian world and the real in the military world, and we knew the taxonomies and the lexicons of both, and helped translate and sought to drive commercial technologies that were out in the marketplace that weren't on the Pentagon's radar to help solve problems for the warfighter faster. The level of commitment, agnostic to the fact that there's some folks like, I got my damn staff tour, right? The level of commitment of our civilians and our military in doing the work that they do at the Pentagon is astounding, and I think everybody should have the opportunity to go through there. It's a pretty, despite what you might learn and know, and we're not always paying $800 for a toilet seat, right?
Mm-hmm,
Which you read, but we're not doing that. We can have some reforms, but there's a material commitment in that building to do good. I think that it's one of the national treasures that we have is the uniformity of commitment across all the services that do their work in that building. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you have a special pin. The U.S. Bank people usually wear pins the way I wear my pin. Yours is different. Would you tell us a little bit about that and a little bit about the program?
So many of you know my colleague and our boss, the CEO of U.S. Bank, Richard Davis, and he's architect for a lot of the work that we've sought to do with the military members in the bank. And we've always had a PIN, proud to serve. We've always had a U.S. Bank PIN. And it was about 6 years ago that we created something different, and it was a memory and a memento for all those that had been in the military. So our pin's a little bit different. It's got a flag on it. It says proud to serve. And no matter what employee number you are out of the 68,000 that we have around the country and around the globe, if you're a military member, even in allied services, not just the U.S., you're allowed to wear it. And it's a really neat connection point.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you, Paul.
So grateful.
Thank you.
Here,